Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menasce. On today's show, we're talking about construction defects that require a series of solutions to ultimately correct the problem. Back in 2020, we were building the Sage Oak Assisted Living Complex in Lake Charles, Louisiana. A few months after opening, we started noticing water seeping under the dining room patio doors in each of the buildings whenever we had a heavy rain. Shortly thereafter, we started seeing water collecting under the windows in some of the bedrooms and in the hallway. When it rained heavily, we also observed water overflowing the roof gutters and pooling on the patios. Some patios were not properly sloped, and we saw standing water pooling in places in the middle of the patios. The general contractor was consulted, and we put a game plan together to increase the size of the rain gutters. We would also extend the downspouts and enlarge the downspouts to channel water further away from the buildings. One of the patios was clearly out of spec, and the concrete contractor demolished and recast that single patio. And sadly, none of this solved the problem. A few weeks later, staff was mopping up water in the dining rooms again in multiple buildings, and we still had water entering the bedrooms and the hallways. We even had water coming in where the patio had been redone. So the question is, when there's a problem with the building envelope, how do you diagnose the problem, and ultimately, what do you choose as a solution? Well, we went through several iterations of diagnosis. In the end, there was more than one problem. There were several. The first culprit was the landscaping team had graded the property with topsoil, but their measurements were not accurate. When the sod was added on top of the soil, and the final grade was measured, it was clear that the grass was way too high up the side of the building. The weeping holes in the brick that are designed to allow drainage of the brick, should water ever get behind the brick, were actually below grade. These weeping holes were letting water into the building when the saturated ground needed a place to drain. Rather than drain away from the building, water would take the path of least resistance and drain into the building instead. This one was a relatively easy fix, at least conceptually. The scope was large, given that they had made the mistake very consistently by landscaping the entire property in a very consistent manner, so they needed to regrade the lawn around the perimeter of all the buildings. We were also concerned about the storm drains not being very effective. We saw evidence of them not draining as they should. The ground near the buildings would get saturated during heavy rains, and the drains were getting clogged with grass clippings. We had to ensure that the landscapers who were tasked with mowing the lawn kept the drains clear of leaves and grass clippings after each mowing. That left the issue of the patios. The gutters could be increased in size. We could increase the size and number of downspouts to handle the very large volume of water coming off the roof. But ultimately, we were unconvinced this would solve the problem. The dining room doors were designed to have a very low threshold to allow seniors with wheelchairs and walkers to walk outside without having to jump a curb. And when there's a wind-driven rainstorm, one side of the building or another would experience wind-driven rain collecting up against the door threshold. You simply cannot seal the bottom of a door if water collects up against the door. Doesn't matter how good of a sweep you put on the door, water will eventually get in. We looked at demolishing all of the patios and putting a more aggressive slope. We considered installing a perimeter trench drain in all of the patios that would allow at least a volume of water to be channeled away from the building. But would it be enough? Would the effect of gravity be stronger than the effect of wind-driven rain? We were unconvinced. Now, these patios are large. They essentially represent a courtyard that's surrounded by building on 3 sides and open to the garden on the 4th side. Demolishing and redoing all of that concrete would be costly, and it would offer no guarantee of a solution. So the final solution was based on the idea that wind-driven rain will only go so far. What if, rather than trying to solve the problem down below at the ground level, what if the solution could be found overhead? Would it be possible to design a rigid canopy to fully cover the patios? This would ensure that if water did fall on the patios, it would have to travel uphill for a distance of 16 to 20 feet before reaching the door. And since the patios would be fully covered, wind driven in the direction of the dining room doors would cause an air pressure buildup under the canopy that would eventually make that wind speed drop to 0. We would ensure the water would never actually reach the dining room doors. In the end, that was the chosen solution. We covered all of the patios with a rigid canopy that had its own gutter system integrated, and those gutters would further channel water away from the building. So rather than just fix a defect, we added a shade feature to the patios that was superior to the cafe umbrellas there originally. And after 2 years of operation with the new canopies, we've had 0 issues with water intrusion. Now, we had multiple issues here. In each case, we had a choice between fixing a defect or solving the problem. In the case of the landscaping, fixing the defect indeed solved the problem. But in the case of the patios, fixing the defect would not have solved the problem. We needed to look outside the narrow scope of the point where water was entering the building. If water never reached that point, then no fix was required to the doors or the patios. See, these types of problems are systemic. They will recur over and over again unless there's a holistic solution. As you think about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.